ready to say something so good that it ends up on the sizzle reel?
Yes.
I feel like our
Definitely.
goal should be to
Wow.
like knock Mark Zuckerberg off.
Correct.
So good that there's not space. Hi, I'm Amanda Hess. I'm a critic at large for the New York Times, and I am so excited to be here at Inforum at the Commonwealth Club in collaboration with the New York Times. And I'm excited that I am joined by Thomas Page McBee, who is a journalist and author of the memoir Amateur, and Samita Mukhopadhyay, executive editor of Teen Vogue,
Yes.
and editor of the essay collection Nasty Women, Feminism, Resistance, and Revolution in Trump's America. And we're here to talk about gender on the internet. But first, I think we need to talk about what happened today, because I don't think there's any, I don't know, I was like, I'm not sure what else to talk about. Is anybody else having a bad day? And like, kind of a lousy day. Like I woke up this morning and the hearings were already happening, and so I was watching them on my phone, and I was alone because I was traveling, so they were like my constant companion all day, and I guess I didn't totally realize how long they would last, so I was watching them while I was like packing in my Airbnb and then in my Lyft and like other, various internet facilitated forms of living. And then I got on the plane and finally like I had to stop watching the live stream because my plane was going to take off, and I just like I started crying then because I feel like it was the first time that I was just not in it and had time to like just time with my thoughts, and I feel like it was like a a reel of like all of the big and small indignities that have happened to me or people I know that are in some way resonant with what happened today, and that's a lot of them. I mean, we've had like a lot of bad public days recently, and I feel like this is maybe one of the worst public days. Um, so yeah. So I got off the plane. Well, first, then I realized that I could watch like the live TV on the plane. But I didn't have headphones that fit because now like Apple makes phones that don't have headphones that work with planes. So I was just watching Brett Kavanaugh, like his face and like him yelling, but I didn't know what he was saying, which was kind of actually nice. And I cried like the whole way on the plane, but I was coming from LA, so it was only like an hour. And then I went to the express spa in the airport, and they were like, "What time does your plane take off?" And I was like, "No, I just got here, and I'm just staying in the airport to be at the express spa." And now I'm here, and it's nice to be offline, even though I have this iPad that they are razzing me about. This like huge iPad my notes are on. So thank you for coming and talking. I feel like one of the things that today really hammered home for me and my relationship with the internet is just like what a double-edged sword social media is. Because I did find, this is not always true, but I like, especially because I was alone all day, I found like a lot of moments of connection on Twitter with women who were like tweeting about their reactions to the hearings and their experiences. But I was also just, beyond like the marathon live stream, it was like just so much information, a lot of it upsetting, just pummeling at me. And I was kind of like, I was just sifting through all of it and trying to like find things to plug into like the angry side of my brain to like fuel my anger, and then like the calming side of my brain. How was your guys' day on the internet?
Yeah, it was pretty tough. It's my job, right, to watch it, and so I was up here like at 6 a.m. And like only had drank coffee, so I was just like already on edge. And I think I'm so used to kind of compartmentalizing because I have to cover this stuff. I have to make assignments. I have to make sure that my team doesn't lose focus in these moments, because everything, while we're watching it, we're going to have to write things as they're happening. And I did not expect to get as upset as I got during Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's testimony, in a way that, and I think speaking to your point, of it was this kind of like deluge of emotion that I think that we've all been sitting with. What I compared it to was the election, only in that it still happened after the pussy grab tape had leaked, and I was like, "There's no way!" Like after something like that happens, and I think that same kind of frustration and knowing that this woman, the perfect victim on every way. She's a mom. She's like blonde. Like and it doesn't, and it doesn't matter. Like and I think that's what I kept coming back to is that it's not going to matter. There's a good chance it won't matter. And that helplessness.
Can I also just say
yeah.
that it was like when they were trying to find dirt on her, it was like, so you like to go on vacation?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like
you're anxious about flying, but you flew.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that it was, and I ended up sending a note to my team to say, if you need to check out today, which is not normal for an editor to do, but I was like, I can barely get through the day. And I think that led to it led to a really productive conversation in the newsroom about kind of what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a journalist in this moment, trying to cover this. And then, yeah, I think similarly, 2 days ago, I was going to delete my Twitter account. I was like, Twitter's ruined political conversation in America. And low-key true. And and then today I was like, oh, right, like all these women are speaking up and it's really important and like we're all building community. But when you have a conversation in person about something like this, it's like you have the conversation and then they don't like continue like in your DMs to, like it's like, okay, we had the conversation and then like you move on. But now it's like you turn your phone on and that conversation just keeps coming back and coming back and coming back. And that felt really overwhelming.
Yeah. I've been thinking about whether it's Twitter's fault or if it's like 24-hour news' fault, and now I've come to the conclusion that they're like colluding together to make it as terrible as possible. But I've also been thinking about the idea of the news cycle and how outdated that is. It's like, well, a cycle starts over again, and this just seems to just continue, in a way that I think is very, it's exhausting. Like, the feeling you get when you like watch a movie and then the movie's over and it's satisfying because then you can think about the movie and the movie can add meaning to your life and the movie's over but like you're still alive and you've survived. And now I feel like this news or this dysfunction is just like there are things that happen that seem like they're like climaxes in the story, but then there's no resolution. They just keep happening. And sometimes there are like moments of levity. Like a lot of this is playing out kind of like a farce, especially on Twitter. But then again, it like never ends. And then, it just makes you feel like it's going to be happening like long after we're dead. And that makes you feel powerless and small, I guess.
I also felt like it was a historic day, though.
Yeah.
It felt I don't always live watch things, but I felt like I had to, like for the sake of my children, or something. Like I really felt like I had to be part of this because it I don't know, like Dr. Ford specifically. When I was watching her as a survivor of sexual violence myself, but also as a man and also as a trans man. So I felt like very conscious of all my identities watching her and what a heroic display of vulnerability she was presenting, and I was having the same experience around, I guess, internet community and feeling really like held up by that. And then with Kavanaugh, it almost felt like a object lesson in toxic masculinity. Like literally, like the way he was behaving, the way everyone was behaving around talking to him, the way people were upholding him in this way that men do around masculinity. So the whole thing felt like such a theater of gender that that maybe we all need to bear witness to in the same. And that's how I feel about, I don't know, all of what's happening right now. Like it's horrible, and also if we pay attention, maybe we'll actually learn something.
Yeah. One of the things that we were talking about earlier is this idea that I think has always existed, but that is exacerbated by the internet, which is that there are completely different audiences for like the first testimony that we heard and the second testimony that we heard. And they're talking to different groups of people. And that's always happened, but now there are whole media ecosystems based around like both of those things. I have not, and like I don't think I want to or can right now, like delve into the group that Brett Kavanaugh was speaking to, but I do think there is a place where that was playing really, really well. Thomas, like, has written very smartly about masculinity, and I feel like that's something that is like really. This is like a really difficult topic to talk about right now.
Yeah.
Can you talk about like the places on the internet where like young men go to like talk about being men, and like are any of them good?
I think we all know some of the places that aren't good, the red pill kind of places. But Man and I were talking about this earlier in the week, that there's a hashtag on Instagram that I'm fascinated with. It's the masculinity hashtag. And if you're interested, I suggest following it. It's a real wild ride, because you know how Instagram works, it like surfaces anything that's popular. So you've got like basically every perspective on masculinity that exists right now represented there. So there's definitely the stuff you would expect in the red pill. Does everyone know what I mean by red pill? The kind of like, men's rights activists, hard right version, and then the men who feel aggrieved by the world we currently live in because it's hard to be them. And then there's the thanks. That's my dry New York wit. I've been working on it. But then there's the guys who are doing that spiritual masculinity thing, which is also weird. But the reclaiming oneself through like being a man more, but in a like communal like kind of soft way at camps and stuff. And then there's like the feminist version of masculinity. But it's like interesting for me to like I learn a lot actually watching that. But I don't know. I don't think that there's like I see that those are the three kind of main schools, at least that I've been able to sort of pay attention to and track, and in terms of what bubbles up. But I don't know of any like central place besides Reddit. But that's a hard place to wade into.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like Samita and I have both been writing in like women's spaces for a while, and I feel like even in, the past like 10 to 15 years that I've been working in that area, like I've seen this huge shift in girls and their interest in identifying as feminists, and now it's like very popular and cool, and it's this thing that provides like just kind of like friendship and social support, but also like sees young women's struggles. And I feel like there's often this line that's like feminism is for men too, but I don't know that there are any spaces where that's really true, where like they're, and I don't know whose fault that is, but I don't see something that's for boys, that's productive, that's also not like kind of lame.
Well, there is the healthy masculinity movement, which maybe arguably could sometimes be kind of lame, but I think overall is pretty cool and interesting.
Feminism can be kind of lame.
Yes, exactly. But that was all.
And also like there's a lot of fighting also. Yeah. It's not always nice, but yeah.
But healthy masculinity came out of that sort of idea came from domestic violence work that men were doing with other men around like stopping domestic violence at its root. And so they were like working with sociologists were some of the first men who started thinking about how can men support the end of violence against women, but also how is the way male violence against women reflecting on men themselves and like all the other ways that masculinity can be toxic. So there's a lot of groups and organization and I'm sure hashtags around healthy masculinity that maybe is a good place where that conversation's happening. But I don't think it's necessarily caught fire the way feminism has.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about just the act of writing about identity, for lack of a better term? I feel like I don't know. Is that what I should call it?
No, that's
I
good.
feel like
yeah,
that's a catch-all. I feel like when I started writing on the internet, like in I guess 2007, it seemed really full of promise. Like there seemed to be a lot of changes happening, and that there was this like very optimistic opportunity for people who previously like may have been boxed out of the mainstream media to like have voices and followings and discussions with one another. And over the past few years, like even though all of that is still true, there's been kind of like a curdling in my mind of how effective it is. Do you guys have a sense of do you how has that experience been like for you since you started? Have your feelings about the temperature changed?
Yeah. So, I obviously started my career very outside of mainstream media, with a website blogging, kind of extremes of consciousness that we thought were left out of the mainstream media, right? Conversations that weren't happening. And, agreed that it felt very full of promise. I think 2004, 2005, you were like, we have blogs, they're about identity. We're having these really riveting conversations that publications are not able to have. But I really hesitate to romanticize that time because there was a lot of infighting then also. And there was a lot of kind of, there was a really kind of small window of what was acceptable to talk about online without people being like, oh, but like you're, without like kind of labeling you something like an apologist, or I think people called me a white feminist all the time because it was like pre-social media and like we didn't have our like headshots on movable type. Yeah. like that's though my name that no one can pronounce didn't give it away. But so but I think one of the biggest transitions that we've seen in the last 10 years is that like I started at a website like Feministing and now I'm at a women's magazine like Teen Vogue. And I think that what I have seen happen is that publications realized, oh, we have this growing audience. We need to figure out how to reach that audience. And that's an identity-focused audience, right? And so Thomas and I both worked at this publication called Mike, which had literally a vertical called Identities, right? And that was kind of the catch-all for like where we talk about race, class, gender, and sexuality. And it was important, but like as we face all these cutbacks in newsrooms, like those are usually the first departments to go as well. And so can I say that like it's fundamentally shifted, who is creating news and who's reading news? In some ways, yeah, in really profound and exciting ways, but in other ways, no. And, and I do go back and forth with it. Like I said, I wanted to delete Twitter 2 days ago because I feel like I can't actually talk about sexual assault and Me Too with the complexity that I want to talk about or the complexity that like the three of us can talk about it at dinner online. It's just not possible. And that's and I don't know what it is that makes it feel impossible. It's like being hated. Like nobody wants to feel like they're not liked or that they didn't say something that was politically correct or they didn't, and and it's this interesting place to be because I feel like in 2004, 2005, I would have been the first person online to call someone out for that, right? I'd be like, that's wrong and this is why. But that I do worry about that without sounding like, Jonathan Chait, like I do worry about that, right? I do worry that, especially people that are kind of new to these issues, where are the spaces that we can kind of experiment with our voices? And we can kind of, like one thing I noticed on the timeline today, halfway through, I was like, wow, like really not a lot of men speaking out today.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Yeah. And I was like, well, but they don't know what to say. And like, there's a piece of that that's kind of like, oh, come on, really? And then there's a piece of that that's very real, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about that too because there were some. I mean, I was just in an angry place today, and there are all these books out that are coming out that are about women's rage, and I haven't read them yet, but some people I know wrote them, and I'm sure they're very good. And at first, I was sort of like, I don't know that I am angry, I was like, I'm not sure that that's the emotion that I'm most feeling, and I think I've sort of realized it's because like when I'm really angry I just like I cry and it seems like I'm sad but I'm also very angry. And today I was like, no, I'm very angry today. And one of the things that like set me off was some guys on Twitter like talking about how they went to elite private schools on the East Coast as if they have something interesting to say because they have like shared this experience. And I'm like, that is like, we don't care. And also like, it's not like they're like, ooh, ask me about Beach Week or whatever. Like, I know what that is. And it's like, it's called Beach Week. Like we all know what that is and it's fine. So yeah, I mean, there was one thing that I saw, which is not an internet thing, but it was a newspaper ad that was signed by like 1,600 men or something, and their names are really small, and I loved that. Like, I loved I love that they did it, but I also love that their names are really small. Because on Twitter, it's sort of like there's this double-edged sword where I think a lot of it is very sincere. People want to have something to say, but it's also like, and here's my name and face, like remember me as the great person who said this thing at this time, and that can be really problematic.
I think also there's a lesson. Like, I think a lot of men are trying to be better listeners, but also, like, I think maybe not being super honest with themselves, you know? Like, I think the idea of letting women talk is obviously very important now and always, but that can be a way to not engage emotionally with the experience of what you might actually be feeling, which hopefully, if you're having any kind of sense of empathy, which a lot of boys are socialized out of, so maybe that's hard and challenging for you, which is personal work you should be doing simultaneously. And I mean that, like, I think it's really important, but I think that for that reason, there's a way that it's like the best thing to do is not say anything, and then sort of say to yourself or others, like, that means I'm listening. But I think really engaging honestly with that question of like, are you listening actually, and then what effect is it having, and are you talking to anyone about how you feel, like maybe other men? And also sometimes showing support is a really important part of this process. And in fact, I think most women and everybody would benefit from like more male voices in a supportive way. So that thought, and then one other thing you were saying, I was thinking about, we came up in the same way around the internet, and as a trans person, I transitioned and then sort of immediately got I got my media career kind of started around that time, and it was the rise of blogs. So this is like 2000, the late 2000, late aughts, late aughts, and so. Are we even using that term, aughts?
I don't know.
Anyway,
Just
well,
don't have to call it anything.
aughts, the late aughts. But I was thinking a lot about how like, you know, the blog seemed like a way for people to get in who were marginalized, like to change the face of the way media works and looks and thinks. And I think absolutely it did in some ways, but also it came with the moment of like algorithm stratification and a million different ways of thinking and all the splintering that happened, and then how we all became market shares anyway, and now we're all brands. So there feels like there's not been whatever the hope was of like coalescing into a kind of a bigger conversation. It just seems like instead we're having a million side conversations, and then the fear of failing within like a nuance, like around people who are different than you, I think prevents us all from having any actual conversation. So
Right. And it's also happened like right at the same time when starting a media career like is a very precarious thing to do, and that only makes it like whiter and all of the other things that whiteness represents. So that's a concern to me. Like it's ironic that it's like, oh, well, like let like women and people of color and everyone else like enter our newsrooms at the same time as like it kind of sucks to be here now, or like it's not as like fancy as it used to be. I actually
it's not a
think
stable job.
yeah, it's not a
Yeah.
stable job, right? I was I mean, I don't have like very many nice things to say about Twitter, but I do think that Twitter has this elegant thing where you can show that you're listening by just retweeting people.
yeah.
And I don't know if that's something that like you're saying like works on the personal level, or if it's just something that works as like it doesn't make me the reader want to poke my eyes out, which I think that enough is like pretty good. But it is something, I think it's an easy thing to say for someone who is like not sure what to say. It's like boost somebody else, what someone else has to say with this like convenient tool that is in Twitter.
What other feedback do you two have about what men can do on the internet
Oh.
besides retweeting?
Oh.
In terms of either showing, listening, or like what do you want to hear men do or say that they're not doing?
I mean, I definitely heard I think this is a little different because we're so close, but I heard, you know, like my boyfriend I don't think he I haven't been following his Twitter account. I don't know what he tweeted, but he reached out to me to talk about it
Yeah.
because he knew how upsetting it was, you know, so I don't know if like the greatest things that I've seen are actually public facing. I don't know.
one of the things that I felt throughout kind of when the Me Too hashtag became viral was, both that it was so important to listen to women's stories. And I think it was this moment, a very revelatory moment that people were like, wow, every woman in my life has had an experience or like around sexual abuse in some way. And I do think that was very educational for a lot of men. I talked to a lot of men offline about it. I think what the parallel experience that would have been, and I know there are so many reasons, one of them being legal, why that's not possible, is that what Kavanaugh, what Ford described today about those boys laughing and how that was just some fun for them at, this party where she was assaulted. That's an experience that a lot of men have been bystanders in. And I'd like to see more men come forward and talk about those and be like, this happened, and I wasn't the best person I could be in that moment, or I did laugh it off. And I understand the fear and the reticence and the judgment that comes with doing that. But I saw one person on my Facebook page talk about this during Me Too, an experience that he had where he was like, I made this girl kiss me in the kissing booth in 8th grade. Then I gaslit her. And it was clearly, and he was like, I'm so embarrassed to write this. My mother's my friend on Facebook. But it was such a powerful experience because I realized that how many times do women have to come forward and tell their stories and for them to matter? But like, what is the parallel vulnerable experience for men to come forward and have?
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's something to that also that's like I forget what I was gonna say.
It's been a day.
It's
It's
been
been a
such a
day.
day. So at Teen Vogue, can you tell us like what teenagers are responding to and like what they like?
Yeah.
Are
So
are they gonna save all of us?
I would like to think, yeah, I believe, I hope, I like to hope that. Well, it's interesting hearing us talk about, a lot of us started reading and writing before social media was a thing, right? And for our teens, like, we're like, oh, I don't really like Twitter. For them, it's everything, right? Like, they literally determine people's value based on how many followers they have and how much engagement they get on social media in a way that is not like, we do too, right? But for us, it's like there was a time when we didn't have it, so we have some
before time.
memory. We have something,
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
yeah. It was called the '90s. Yeah, you had to make really good plans then. Yeah, no texting. Yeah, so I do think that they, I mean, also like teens, like any generation, are very diverse and, but they are very fluent online, and I think that. The piece around identity and how they kind of engage with identity, I mean, it's just everything about their life is identity based, and whether that's kind of like selfie culture and identifying as something and presenting that self, or if it's kind of cancel culture a little bit where they are much more savvy about like they're like, that person's a bigot, like they're like completely not interested, like they're done, like and like we can there's a lot of hand wringing about that, but they're actually quite sophisticated in that they're just like, no, I want a person that can be like the Secretary of Education. I just want them to think trans people are human. Like that's just and so they're just so much more progressive. Like it's amazing. I mean, even when you think about gender or feminism, I mean, they're just like, my feminism is intersectional. Like they did, they're like, Hillary, we want Laverne Cox to be president. Like this is, like we're beyond gender, right? And I think, I think some of these stats, like it's something like 40% of teens identify as gender nonconforming. I mean, they're literally tearing down what it means to be gender, like what it means to have a gender, and using online tools to kind of like access information about it, or to express it, or to be really messy about it, and like not always be eloquent about it, but it is very much kind of the tools that we are like, that sucks and this does, I don't really want to use that anymore. That's in some ways that's just a fundamental part of their life, and they're growing up on these tools, and so as much as I want to abandon them, I also feel this strong need to kind of educate around best practices around social media, and how best to kind of express yourself and still not be too vulnerable and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I remember what I was going to say about the men. So there's a lot of conversation like around the reckoning, like it was like a thing that happened
Yeah.
and now we're dealing with the fallout and what's going to happen next. And it's about like how do these men come back, or like in a more progressive sense, like is there restorative justice like for men who have done bad things to women? And I feel like we're stuck, like part of the reason that we can't talk about that or think about what that would even look like is that they won't even admit that it happened. So we're still dealing with these different realities. We're like Brett Kavanaugh won't even go so far as to say, you know, like I was an asshole and I made fun of this girl in my yearbook. Instead, he's like, I'm a great person who had a friend and celebrated her. And so I don't know if we're ever going to get past that point where we're living in these two realities, but that does sort of speak to me, like the thing that that man did on Facebook, like why that is so important, because in so many cases it's just denied that it even exists. On that note, we're going to go to questions. If you have one, someone will come around with the microphone. Please don't just call out your question if you don't have a microphone. We'll get one to you. Does anyone have a question?
If anybody's nervous, we can get started with one from one of the fantastic Ask Amanda cards that are also out in the
Okay.
lobby.
There's also, I think there's a question over here.
Oh, is there one?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. I'd like to tee mine up with a quick retweet, which is Sarah Schaefer in August. I think it was around when Alex Jones was getting kicked off various platforms. Said she says Jack has a point. Twitter does naturally fact check itself. As a woman on here, I have a team of about 40,000 fact checkers ready to let me know if I ever make a logical fallacy or grammar mistake or have a wrong opinion or look ugly or I'm feeling myself too much. It just works. So I'm curious what opinions you guys have about how to make the internet less aggressive for women to just be on it.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that a lot of it does have to do with the attention economy, where it's like any contribution, no matter how vile it is like good for Twitter because people are being engaged. And it's also like until it like pushes me off of Twitter entirely, it also keeps me more engaged with Twitter because I'm always like, in the back of my mind, I'm like, I wonder if someone said something that like could ruin my career if I don't like go fix it on Twitter. And then I, or maybe they said something nice and it's like, what's it going to be every time? So I do think the fact that like that's how money is made is bad for a lot of reasons and probably also for women. What do you guys think?
Well, Amanda, I have to call out your kind of groundbreaking work on this, especially like the essay you wrote about when you went to the police about something, and they were like, "What's Twitter?" Right? and I think that, I mean, that's obviously not the case anymore. But I do think that
But this was like 4 years ago, so it wasn't like Twitter.
Yeah, it was like-
just
yeah.
started. Yeah.
I mean, can you talk about that a little?
Yeah.
Throwing it
So
back.
I wrote something that's about. That was about harassment on the internet and how it's this intractable. It was this intractable. Is that the word? Great, thank you. See, this is good feedback. Problem where if it happened on a social media platform, like I was threatened on Twitter by an anonymous user, and Twitter was like, "Oh, that's terrible. You should tell the police because that's a crime to threaten to rape and kill someone." And the police were like, we don't know who that is, so you should ask Twitter to help you. And then they were like, great, like good day at work, like we resolved the problem. And it was this ping pong back and forth, and it would never be resolved. And one of the sort of depressing things that I learned was that when I talked to people who worked in law enforcement on the internet, they were like, look, the things that we focus on are child pornography cases because those are extremely serious, and they put people away for a long time when you solve them, and that's where we put our like scant resources. And so, which obviously made me feel a little bad because I was like, obviously I don't want to take resources away from that, but it was clear that there's such a lag there, and also like the social media companies are like whatever the opposite of a lag is. They're just like barreling into our lives like no matter what sort of happens. So I actually don't know if much, I mean, some things have changed since then, in that like Alex Jones is finally like not on social media anymore. And he, he was not only like someone who was really poisonous, but also like was threatening people. But yeah, I don't know. It's still bad. Next question.
Hey guys. One of the more heartrending tweets I've seen recently was from a high school student, a young woman who tweeted, listening to people sort of justify Brett Kavanaugh was really horrifying for her. And the other day, President Trump got asked at an event what message he would send to young men right now, and he basically gave the worst possible answer you could imagine. So I'm curious what message you all would send to young men right now, and also in the spirit of interneting, how you might send it to them. I feel like all the positive messages I got as a young man came from like Degrassi episodes in health class. So how would you deliver that today?
Yeah.
I first just want to say that I saw that tweet because you retweeted it, and it was a positive man retweet
Yes.
of the thing. Do you guys want to try?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, yeah, I guess I'm uniquely positioned because we talk to teens every day. And we are in the process of producing, teen voices responding to that exact sentiment, that the idea that a teen girl is just a bump in the road on the way to like a man's self-discovery. And teens have very strong opinions about what's happening with Kavanaugh right now, contrary to what you would think. And even like myself, like I did not think that they would be as engaged in this issue, but because the talking point continues to be this is boys will be boys, there's even actually been young men that have been speaking out and saying, there was like 3 boys that walked out on Monday, and kind of tweeted like, they were like, well, we just want everyone to know that like not all high school boys are just like just rape, and so I do think it's heartening, and in terms of the messages we're putting out there, I mean, I think it's really showing like, why does this matter so much right now, and what is it that both like and I think similar to what Amanda was saying earlier, there is a lot of media that's targeting young women, and there is a lot of opportunity for them to have conversations about this in a way that there isn't for young boys right now. And one of the things that I'm just thinking about it and trying to do is, how do we have those? Like, how do we kind of bring them in and not just immediately make them feel like they're guilty or they're bad or they, shouldn't explore their sexuality when they're young, because I think that's a lot of what's happening right now. And so, and one thing that is a lot of fun, I mean, I think the biggest piece that I get the most emails about is this like guide to anal sex that we had from last year that was like before my time even. But, I think putting out these kind of really sex positive messages around consent and, what is consent, and, and what is the appropriate way to express it, and what is the appropriate way to kind of mutually express it, and so like really focusing on that type of kind of storytelling has been what we're doing.
I know that Thomas kind of hates this, but I would
Always a good
buy
start.
Thomas's book for any young man in your life, because or woman of any age, but because we're talking about young men, because it really does like thread this needle between recognizing men and their humanity and all of the things that they're dealing with, and also like recognizing the culture that they grow up in, and what it means to have like a personal accountability for that. So they'll be available after.
But I think thank you. I do kind of hate it, but I also am very honored. But I think the idea that masculinity isn't a monolith is like a revolutionary idea for at least people my age and older. I think younger people maybe aren't so confused about that, but I think so much of how we've socialized men for generations is to think that there's one way to be a man. And if you're like, you have to be a real man, which who knows what that even means, and it's a moving target, and you spend all your time trying to shore up that moving target, and then it changes again. So, like, the idea that we can maybe expand what being a man means seems like the first step to show younger men, especially, that, like, they can be part of that expansion and diluting like the toxic parts of masculinity, and maybe even being part of a revolution of what masculinity even means, since it is literally just characteristics associated with men. So it's a moment in time where we can change what it means in a positive way.
I think we have time for one more.
Hi. So I had a question around if you all think that there's a business or organization. I feel like brands can do a lot to move things forward. I work at a company that has its own little sizable social media presence and email presence with a tiny staff. And I'm thinking every day with our videos and our social, how can we be more diverse? How can we show more people that aren't just like our founder? How can we, and I wonder if you feel like there are brands that are doing this in a way that isn't pandering, not just sort of like a Dove commercial with a bunch of women in different size underpants or something touching their skin and feeling good about it, but actually really I'm always looking for more brands and organizations that are moving that message forward in a way that doesn't feel cheesy, that is authentic, that actually is inclusive in a real way, takes more people in. Either in their video digital content or in their social presence in general, that you're excited by, that you're inspired by?
I mean, I'm often like really allergic to attempts to do that, like, like the Dove approach. And so I was kind of surprised that I really liked the new Nike campaign with Colin Kaepernick. And part of it is I think that he was fighting on this corporate battlefield where it's like he was trying to express himself on television within the NFL, and Nike is like, guess what? Like, we can buy an ad that goes in between those things that people have to watch that features you. And so there was something kind of like dastardly about that, I thought, that I liked. But also, I mean, part of it must also be because like Nike's just really good, and so when they tell a story, it feels real, as opposed to like Dove having a mug shot. Like, have you seen this commercial where it's like women go in and they're like, and he's like, describe the way you look, and she's just like, I'm a monster or whatever, and he draws it and she looks terrible, and then a stranger comes in and is like, oh, she looks nice or whatever, and then she's amazed to see. I'm like, I don't buy a second of this. So I guess, and I don't know how Nike does business, but I assume that part of it is just like the people actually crafting these stories are the people who are featured in them, you know what I mean?
I mean, you would like to think that's true.
Or maybe they're just really good. I mean, they have a ton of money.
Yeah.
But I was surprised by how much I really did
Yeah.
like it.
I mean, I think it was obviously a really powerful statement, and it was a risk in a moment where politics are very polarizing. And I mean, a big part of my job is keeping brands happy, right? And so we can so they'll like pay for me to have a staff, and I think that's like even like even less church and state in magazine world, and so I am extremely skeptical of brands' ability to actually tell real stories that aren't tainted by some kind of financial agenda. But I think that there is something really powerful about the visual piece of it, right? And not knowing, like, I thought I had read that Nike like actually donates more to Republican campaigns or something than like last week, like despite all the Kaepernick stuff. So it's like if you double click, you may not always like what you see. And I will say that, like, as much as I think it's easy to make fun of the Dove Real Beauty campaign, I thought it was really important. I think it's like a big part of it is like forcing people to look at fat women. Like, it's just like, just make them do it because like they're not going to otherwise. And like, I remember I actually lived here when that campaign came out, and these women's bodies, and like by fat I mean like the biggest one was like a 12, like woo, risque, which is like it's like literally sample size. But the fact that they were all over Bart, and like you just couldn't, like, it was an actual beauty campaign where everyone wasn't a size 2. There was some work that happened there, and I think there is something about that visual. Yes, it's superficial. If you dig too deep, you're gonna find some nefarious things. It is capitalism. But I do think that there is work there in terms of just the representation piece of it.
Okay, now I'm going to do this awkward transition to, we have a video, an interneting video that we're going to show everyone. And I feel like what I'm doing now is similar to what I have to do at the New York Times, which is like, there's like all this news and there's a constitutional crisis, and I'm like slacking to like the people who promote things on the homepage and on Twitter, and I'm like, can I interest you in a video about a silly internet like phenomenon? And they're like, maybe tomorrow when there's not going to be news or whatever. So this video is about surprise videos, a video about videos and why I don't like them. Before we watch it, I just want to thank all of the New York Times subscribers and future New York Times subscribers who are here, and also Commonwealth Club people, and also people who have no affiliation. Thank you for coming. And we're going to have a little reception afterwards, and we're going to escape while you watch the video. So I hope you like it, and thank you so much for coming.
You're so important to me. I love you so much. I didn't think I could love someone for the rest of my life.
Can I tell you something that makes me a little bit of a monster? I hate marriage proposal videos. I hate the proposal video inspired by the Pixar movie Up. I hate the Bruno Mars Marry You proposal flash mob. I hate the one where she takes the world's largest zip line into the proposal. I hate the one where she thinks she's going to go on the Today Show to talk about her nonprofit work, but she's really only there to be proposed to. I really hate the one where the guy tricks her into thinking their plane is crashing and then proposes. But the one where the guy stages a fake arrest of his girlfriend and the only way for her to beat the rap is to agree to marry him.
Can I see the ring, just for evidence?
I probably hate that one the most.
Will you please marry me? Will you marry me?
I hate proposal videos because they turn a private decision between two people into a big surprise that's sprung on just one of them, usually a woman, in a way that is so dramatic in public that it feels a little bit coercive. But the same thing that makes these videos a little gross is also what makes them so popular.
Yes.
A part of me must love them because every single one of them, without fail, makes me cry. I hate that about them too.
Some birthdays are more special than others.
So much viral video is built on these kinds of surprises. Proposal videos, promposal videos, college acceptance videos, soldiers coming home videos, soldiers coming home to their dogs videos, pregnancy announcement videos, gender reveal videos. This is the YouTubeification of dramatic irony. Everyone watching knows what's going to happen. The surprises aren't surprising to us. We don't watch a viral college acceptance video to see whether the kid actually gets into college. We know they do. We want to see them know it.
What?
When we watch these videos, we tend to identify really strongly with the person who's engineering the surprise. Even if only for a couple of moments, we both know something that somebody else doesn't. It makes us feel like a brave soldier or a man in love. It makes us feel important. It makes us feel like Harvard. It's worth asking what this emotional surprise porn has in common with another kind of surprise that dominates online video. The prank.
Oh my God!
We inhale pranks of children and mothers and perfectly nice boyfriends.
What's on my neck? It looks like a hickey.
And really good dogs. We prank dogs now. Cats too. There's a dark side to our obsession with these videos. Viral proposal videos often work by scaring the target.
Oh my God!
Before showering her with everlasting love. It creates the greatest possible emotional whiplash for the camera.
No way!
And it gives us this powerful feeling of control. People in the videos aren't the only ones affected. Lisa Silvestri, who studies digital culture and war, suggests that surprise homecoming videos produce a feeling of vicarious sacrifice. When we watch them and cry, she says, we feel as if we've sacrificed something too, even if it's just our own complacency. Which means we might feel incredibly strong, positive vibes around issues that we don't necessarily agree with. A soldier's homecoming inspires really warm and patriotic feelings about the place he's coming home from, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. A college acceptance video reinforces the vaguely dystopian idea that higher education is a once-in-a-lifetime privilege, not a right. And a surprise proposal video suggests that the most important moment of a woman's life is when a man chooses her for marriage. Maybe you already agree with all of those things. Or maybe you don't, but you just want to feel something. And that's okay too. You can keep your surprise videos.
I think she's saying I can't do it right now.
And I'll keep mine.